All right, let's dive into this one. Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck. Have you ever heard of this one?
Oh, absolutely. This book, it kind of throws the typical self-help playbook right out the window.
Yeah, it's not about like rainbows and affirmations, is it?
Not exactly, no. It's more like a dose of reality. Like,
Yeah.
it's okay to not be okay all the time.
And to be picky about what we care about.
Exactly. We only have so much energy, right? Manson's all about figuring out what's truly important and just letting go of the rest.
Okay, so not giving a feck, but in like a strategic way.
Exactly. He calls it the subtle art for a reason.
So one thing that struck me is how he goes after this idea that we always need more stuff, more success, more experiences. Is like that's the recipe for happiness, right?
Wow, that's what we're often told, yeah.
Yeah.
But Manson, he challenges that whole idea. Like, remember that story he tells about the wealthy prince? The guy has everything, but he's miserable. So he goes out looking for suffering, thinking that's the path to enlightenment.
Wow, talk about going against the grain. But it makes you think, doesn't it? Like, are we just chasing an illusion?
That's exactly the point. The prince's story shows how that pursuit of more can be, well, kind of a trap.
So what's the alternative? If more isn't the answer, then what is?
Well, Manson argues that it's not about avoiding struggles altogether, but about choosing the right struggles. You know, the ones that actually matter to you.
I think I see where you're going with this. Like, it's not about having a problem-free life. It's about having the right problem.
Exactly. And he uses some really interesting examples to illustrate this. Like, you remember Dave Mustaine?
Oh, yeah. The guitarist got kicked out of Metallica.
Right. Even after he found success with Megadeth, he still kind of felt like a failure. Why? Because he was always comparing himself to Metallica.
Yeah.
He chose the wrong struggle.
And it was eating him up inside.
Exactly. But then contrast that with Pete Best, the drummer who got replaced by Ringo Starr in the Beatles.
Oh, wow. Yeah. What happened to him?
He went on to have a totally normal, happy life outside of music. Didn't let that one experience define him.
So it's all about how you frame things, what you choose to focus on.
Absolutely. Manson's point is that you have to define success for yourself. What are your values? What truly matters to you? Because if you're constantly chasing someone else's definition of success, you'll never feel fulfilled.
And that brings us to, I think, a really important question for our listeners. What are you chasing in your life? Is it truly making you happy? Or are you stuck in that cycle of wanting more?
It's definitely worth reflecting on.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the things we think we want, they're not actually what we need.
You know, that reminds me of another concept that Manson talks about, embracing failure. He's not afraid to talk about his own screw-ups, and he actually sees them as essential to his success.
He's got this great line about how failure isn't the opposite of success, it's a part of it.
Yeah, and it really challenges that societal fear of failure we all have, right? Like, we're supposed to be perfect, always winning.
And Manson's saying, hey, screw that. Like, think about it. You learn way more from your mistakes than from your successes.
I think a lot of us would agree with that, but it's hard to actually live by it, you know?
Totally. But he even brings up this psychology experiment where people were rewarded randomly, no matter what they did. And guess what?
They still tried to find a pattern.
Exactly. They were like, there has to be a reason. It shows how much we crave certainty and control, even when it's just an illusion.
So how do we get better at dealing with that? Like, how do we embrace uncertainty?
Well, Manson's got a few ideas about that. One of them is pretty radical, actually. He says we need to get comfortable with being wrong. Like, actively seek out the possibility that our beliefs might be off.
Okay, that does sound kind of scary. But I guess it makes sense, right? Like, the more open we are to being wrong, the more we can learn.
Exactly. It's about staying humble and curious, always questioning our assumptions, even the ones that feel really solid.
That's tough, but I can see how it would be incredibly freeing.
And guess what? That leads us to another big idea from the book: taking responsibility. But not just for our successes, for everything.
Even the stuff that's not our fault.
Yeah. Manson makes a distinction between blame and responsibility. Blame is focused on the past, while responsibility is all about what we can do right now. He uses this really powerful example to illustrate it.
The one with the baby.
You got it. Imagine you find a baby on your doorstep. It's not your fault the baby's there, but suddenly you're responsible for what happens next.
Okay, yeah, that's a lot to take in, but I see the point. It's like, instead of dwelling on why me,
Yeah.
you have to focus on, okay, what now?
Exactly. And he even shares this incredible story about a Japanese soldier, Lieutenant Onoda, who stayed hidden in the jungle for 30 years after World War II
30 years. Whoa, why?
because he was still following orders he got before the war even ended. No one told him it was over.
Wow. So how does that connect to personal responsibility?
Onoda's story, as wild as it is, shows what can happen when we cling to outdated beliefs. We can miss out on so much of life if we refuse to adapt, to question what we think we know.
Okay, yeah. That's a pretty powerful message. So if we take all of this together, choosing our struggles, embracing failure, taking responsibility, it sounds like Manson's really pushing for a different way of thinking about life.
He is. It's not about chasing happiness or avoiding pain. It's about finding meaning and purpose in all of it.
And figuring out what truly matters to us, not to anyone else.
Exactly. So listeners, we want to hear from you. What outdated beliefs are you clinging to? What struggles were you choosing? Share your thoughts with us. We'll be back with more insights from The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck in the next part of this deep dive.
Okay, so we're back diving deeper into the subtle art of not giving a feck. And one thing that really stood out to me is Matt Manson, he doesn't just tell you to stop caring. It's more nuanced than that, right?
Absolutely. He actually spends a lot of time talking about the right things to care about,
Yeah.
the values that actually lead to a good life.
And it's not always what you'd expect from a self-help book, right? Like he doesn't say, go chase pleasure all the time.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
In fact, he thinks that chasing constant pleasure is a terrible way to live.
Really? Why's that?
Well, he compares it to addiction. Like you're always chasing that next hit of dopamine, that next good feeling, but it never really lasts. You're always left wanting more.
Yeah, I can see that. Like buying a new gadget might make you happy for a day or two, but then you're on to the next thing.
Exactly. And Manson actually points to research on happiness that backs this up. Experiences like spending time with loved ones or pursuing a passion tend to create more lasting happiness than material possessions.
So it's not about denying yourself pleasure altogether, it's about recognizing that it's fleeting. It can't be the foundation of your whole life.
Right. And he also challenges the idea that material success equals happiness. Like, yeah, we all need the basics covered, but beyond that, money and possessions don't really move the needle that much. He even talks about lottery winners.
Oh yeah, didn't he say that a lot of them end up miserable?
Yeah, studies show that's actually pretty common. They might have all the money in the world, but it doesn't solve their underlying problems.
So what does Manson say we should be focusing on? If pleasure and riches aren't the answer, what is?
He champions values that are honestly a lot tougher to live by. Things like honesty, responsibility, taking action, even when it's hard.
Okay, so not exactly the easy path.
Nope. But he argues that those are the values that lead to real fulfillment. Like, take honesty. It's not always comfortable, right?
No, definitely not. Sometimes it's easier to just avoid the tough conversations.
But it's crucial for building trust in relationships and for staying true to yourself. It's about integrity.
It's like choosing the harder right over the easier wrong.
Exactly. And another value he emphasizes is taking responsibility, which we talked about a bit earlier.
Yeah, but this time he takes it even further, right? It's not just about owning your choices, it's about owning your problems.
Exactly. Remember that analogy about the baby on the doorstep? It might not be your fault the baby's there, but it's your responsibility to deal with it.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see the pattern here. It's like life's gonna throw crap at you no matter what, but you get to choose how you react to it.
And he has this really memorable analogy to explain that. He calls it the storm analogy.
Oh, yeah. Life's a storm, and you just gotta find the kind of shot you enjoy dealing with.
Right. It's about finding meaning and purpose in those struggles, because they're going to be there no matter what.
So instead of trying to avoid problems altogether, which is impossible, we should be asking ourselves, okay, what kind of problems do I want to have?
Exactly. It's about focusing on what you can control,
Mm-hmm.
your actions, your attitude, how you respond to challenges.
And that reminds me of another thing he talks about, being okay with being wrong. That one kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Huh.
Goes against everything we're taught, right? Like, we have to be right all the time.
But Manson says, actually, that need to be right, it can hold us back.
Big time. Remember that experiment where people tried to find a pattern in random rewards? It shows how much we crave certainty, even when it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's like our brains are wired to look for explanations, even if they're totally made up.
And that's why it's so important to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong. Because the more we cling to our beliefs, the less likely we are to learn and grow.
So it's not about being right all the time. It's about being willing to change our minds when we get new information.
Exactly. And this ties into Manson's emphasis on action over motivation. Like the more we experiment, the more we try new things, the more likely we are to encounter situations where we realize, oh, I was wrong about that.
And that's when the real learning happens.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about values, taking responsibility, being okay with being wrong.
Mhm.
Now, let's get into something that Manson has some pretty unconventional views on: relationships.
Yeah, he's definitely not afraid to challenge the typical romantic ideals.
Nope. He actually thinks that fairy tale version of love we see in movies, it can be pretty harmful.
Really.
He argues that it sets us up for unrealistic expectations. Like we're looking for someone who will complete us, solve all our problems, make us happy all the time.
And when that doesn't happen, because it never does, we're disappointed.
Exactly. And he even uses Romeo and Juliet as an example of how romanticizing love can lead to some pretty bad decisions.
Oh, right. He says they were basically obsessed with each other, which, in the end, led to tragedy.
Yeah. It's a cautionary tale about what can happen when we ignore red flags and get swept up in the intensity of our emotions.
So what's the alternative? Like, if we're not supposed to be looking for the one, what should we be looking for?
Manson says we should focus on finding someone who complements us, who challenges us to grow, but who doesn't try to fix us or complete us.
Someone who sees us for who we are, flaws and all.
Exactly. And he emphasizes the importance of choosing partners based on shared values. Like, do you want the same things out of life?
And are you both willing to, give and receive rejection?
Yeah, that's a big one. Because sometimes, even when you really like someone, you're just not compatible.
And that's okay.
Totally. It's about recognizing that sometimes walking away is the healthiest choice for both people.
So it's not about finding a perfect partner, it's about finding the right partner for you.
And then, once you're in a relationship, Manson says it's important to remember that conflict is inevitable.
Oh, that's comforting.
But here's the thing. He actually sees conflict as a good thing
Wait, really? Why?
because it forces you to communicate, to compromise, to work through things together. It can actually make your relationship stronger.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like you learn how to fight fair, how to resolve disagreements without tearing each other down.
Exactly. And Manson actually makes this really interesting distinction between healthy and unhealthy relationships.
Oh, how does he define that?
He says that in a healthy relationship, both partners are focused on resolving their own problems to better support each other. In an unhealthy relationship, both partners are trying to solve each other's problems to feel better about themselves.
Whoa, okay. That's a subtle but important difference. It's like in a healthy relationship, you're both working on your own stuff so you can be the best version of yourself for each other.
Exactly. You're not trying to change each other, you're supporting each other's growth.
And that takes a lot of self-awareness, doesn't it? Like being honest about your own issues and taking responsibility for them.
Absolutely. And even though it's a tough subject, Manson even tackles infidelity in the book.
Yeah, he doesn't sugarcoat it. He talks about the pain and betrayal that comes with cheating.
Right. But he also offers some insights into how to rebuild trust after it's been broken.
So what's the secret?
Well, he says it starts with the person who broke the trust, taking full responsibility for their actions and acknowledging the values that led them there.
And then they have to demonstrate through their actions consistently that they've changed.
Exactly. It's not enough to just apologize. You have to show that you're committed to rebuilding trust.
And that takes time and a lot of patience from both people.
Absolutely. And this whole conversation about relationships, it actually ties into a larger point that Manson makes about commitment in general.
Okay, how so?
Well, he talks about how our culture often glorifies freedom and choice. But he argues that committing to something, whether it's a person, a career, or even a set of values, can actually be incredibly liberating.
That's interesting. Like, how can limiting your choices actually make you feel more free?
He uses his own experience of traveling the world as an example. He realized that after a while, all those new experiences, they started to feel kind of empty.
Yeah, it's like the paradox of choice, right? Too many options can actually make you feel paralyzed.
Exactly. Manson found that he actually craved a sense of stability, of belonging. He starts to understand the value of committing to something that truly mattered to him.
So it's about making conscious choices, focusing your energy on the things that align with your values, and letting go of the rest.
Right. And that brings us to, well, maybe the biggest, most profound idea in the whole book: death.
Yeah, this is where things get really deep, like existentially deep.
Manson argues that being aware of our own mortality, it's not morbid or depressing. It's actually essential for living a meaningful life.
Okay, I'm gonna need you to explain that one. How can thinking about death make our lives better?
Well, think about Manson's own near-death experience on a cliff in South Africa.
Oh yeah, he talks about that in the book. Pretty intense stuff.
Right, he describes feeling this overwhelming sense of urgency and clarity, realizing that life is precious and that he didn't want to waste it on things that didn't matter.
So it's like facing your own mortality can actually wake you up to what's truly important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he connects this to Ernest Becker's ideas about immortality projects, which are basically all the ways we try to leave a legacy behind, to prove that our lives had meaning.
Because deep down, we're all terrified of dying and just disappearing, right?
Right. But Manson suggests that by accepting our mortality, we can actually free ourselves from that fear. We can let go of the need to prove ourselves or achieve some arbitrary level of success.
And just focus on living a life that feels authentic and meaningful to us.
Exactly. So it's not about denying death or fearing it. It's about using that awareness to fuel our choices and actions.
To live each day with intention, knowing that our time is limited.
Absolutely. And that leads to Manson's final message, which is incredibly powerful and uplifting. You are already great simply by choosing what matters to you and pursuing those values in the face of uncertainty and inevitable death.
Wow, that's beautiful. It's like you don't have to earn your worth, you already have it. Just by being alive and making choices that align with who you are.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we all have the power to create a meaningful life, regardless of our circumstances.
So as we wrap up this second part of our deep dive, I'm curious, what are you taking away from all this? What resonates with you? What are you going to do differently?
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the subtle art of not giving a feck. And wow, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have. From choosing our struggles, to embracing failure, to facing our own mortality, it's been quite a journey.
It has. So as we wrap things up, I thought it might be helpful to kind of like distill some of the key takeaways, the big aha moments, What are you walking away with from this book?
Well, one of the things that really stuck with me is this idea that, we all have limited time and energy. So we have to be really intentional about where we choose to focus that energy.
Yeah, that's where choosing your struggles comes in, right?
Exactly. It's not about avoiding problems altogether, because that's impossible. It's about picking your battles, focusing on the challenges that actually align with your values.
It's like, find the kind of crap you enjoy dealing with, right?
Yeah.
Because life's going to be a shitstorm no matter what, right? And along those lines, Manson's also really big on taking responsibility, not just for the good stuff, but for everything.
Even when things aren't our fault.
Especially then. Remember that analogy with the baby on the doorstep?
Oh yeah, that one was a bit of a mind bender.
It is. But it illustrates the difference between blame and responsibility. Blame keeps you stuck in the past. Responsibility is about focusing on what you can do right now to move forward.
So it's like, yeah, life might throw you a curveball, but you still have the power to decide how you're going to handle it.
Exactly. You always have a choice. And speaking of choices, another big takeaway is that action often comes before motivation.
Yeah, that whole do something principle, it seems counterintuitive, but it really works.
It does. Because sometimes you just got to start moving. Even if it's just a tiny step, that action can create its own momentum.
It's like, stop waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect feeling and just do something. Anything.
Right. And don't be afraid to screw up along the way. Remember, failure is part of the process. It's how we learn and grow.
Yeah, it's like the more you're willing to experiment, to put yourself out there, the more likely you are to, fail sometimes, but also to learn and get better.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important point, which is the importance of questioning our own beliefs.
Oh yeah, don't get too attached to your own ideas.
Right. Remember that experiment where people were rewarded randomly
Yeah.
and they still tried to find a pattern? It shows how much we crave certainty, even when it doesn't exist.
We want to believe that there's a reason for everything, that we're in control.
And sometimes that need for control, it can make us blind to other possibilities.
So it's about being humble, admitting that we don't have all the answers, and being open to new information, even if it challenges our worldview.
Absolutely. And that applies to relationships too.
Oh yeah, Manson has a lot to say about love and connection, and it's not always what you'd expect.
Nope. He's not a fan of that fairy tale version of love that's all about finding the one who will complete you.
He thinks that's setting ourselves up for disappointment.
Big time. He encourages us to focus on finding someone who complements us, who challenges us to grow, but who doesn't try to fix us or complete us.
Because ultimately, we're all responsible for our own happiness.
Exactly. And we need to choose partners who understand and respect that.
And who are okay with, setting boundaries and sometimes saying no.
Right. Because a healthy relationship, it's not about merging into one person, it's about two individuals coming together while still maintaining their own sense of self.
And sometimes that means disagreeing, having conflict.
And you know what? Manson actually thinks conflict can be a good thing.
Really? How so?
Because it forces you to communicate, to compromise, to work through things together. You can actually make your relationship stronger.
As long as you're fighting fair, right?
Exactly. It's about resolving disagreements in a way that's respectful and productive. And of course, Manson also tackles the really tough stuff, like infidelity.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from the hard conversations.
He acknowledges how much pain and betrayal comes with cheating. But he also offers some guidance on how to rebuild trust after it's been broken.
Which is a long and difficult process, right?
Absolutely. It takes a lot of effort and commitment from both people. But he emphasizes the importance of taking responsibility, demonstrating changed behavior, and being patient.
It's about proving through your actions that you're truly sorry and that you're committed to earning back that trust.
Right. And all of this talk about relationships, it actually ties into a bigger point that Manson makes about the importance of commitment in general.
Okay, so how does commitment fit into all of this?
Well, our culture often tells us to prioritize freedom and choice above all else. But Manson argues that committing to something, whether it's a person, a career, or even a set of values, can actually be incredibly liberating.
That's interesting. It's like by limiting our choices, we actually create more freedom in a way.
Exactly. Because we're no longer scattered trying to do everything and be everything,
Yeah.
we can focus our energy on the things that truly matter to us.
So it's about making conscious choices and then having the discipline to stick with them.
Right. And that leads us to, well, maybe the most profound idea in the whole book, death.
Yeah, Manson's not afraid to go there.
He argues that being aware of our own mortality, it's not morbid or depressing, it's actually a key to living a more meaningful life.
Okay, that's a tough one to wrap my head around. How can thinking about death make our lives better?
Well, it reminds us that our time is limited, that we don't have forever to chase our dreams, to tell the people we love how much they mean to us. It creates a sense of urgency.
It's like a wake-up call to stop wasting time on things that don't matter.
Exactly. And by accepting our mortality, we can free ourselves from a lot of the anxieties and fears that hold us back.
The fear of failure, the need to please everyone, the pressure to achieve some arbitrary definition of success.
Right, because in the face of death, all that stuff just fades away. What matters is how we lived, how we loved, what impact we made on the world.
And that brings us to Manson's final message, which is so beautiful and powerful. You are already great simply by choosing what matters to you and pursuing those values in the face of uncertainty and inevitable death.
It's a reminder that our worth isn't based on external achievements or validation, but on our inherent capacity to choose, to create, to love.
It's about recognizing that we already have everything we need to live a meaningful life. We just have to choose it.
And that's what the subtle art of not giving a fig is all about. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this question. What will you choose? What kind of life will you create, knowing that your time is precious and that you have the power to decide what matters most? Thanks for joining us.